Hello everyone, welcome back to another video with On Point Politics, and today we're going to be looking at the 7 state averages that I have for the 2024 presidential election. Hit the like button and subscribe if you want more content just like this. And so I have developed my own state polling averages for the 7 swing states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. Swing state polling the past few years has been extremely abysmal. For example, we can go to the state of Michigan right now. If we were to actually look at it, they have Biden ahead by 6.7% as of 4 years ago. And 8 years ago, they had Clinton ahead by 8. Well, in 2020, you can actually go and see that Biden only won the state by 2.8%, and Clinton actually lost the state at large by 0.22%. So you mean to tell me that she was actually leading by 8 points at one point in time? I actually doubt that. And what I am doing is I'm doing an experiment. I want to get the brand out there for the channel, but what I'm doing is I'm taking things a step further. What I'm doing is I basically have compiled the same pollsters that RCP does in 538, and what we're doing is we're weighing all the polls to essentially a tied electorate or a little bit more redder than what they were in 2020, depending on the state, because each state has different electorates overall. And so these are the swing state averages. Right now, Wisconsin, the former president, is up by 4.7%. Michigan, Trump, he's up by 2. Pennsylvania, he's up by 3 points. North Carolina, he's up by 6 points. Georgia, he's up by 5.9, so almost identical to the state of North Carolina. And Arizona, Trump has an astounding lead of 8.1% there. And in Nevada, Trump is up by 6.7 points in our averages. And like I mentioned, we essentially weighed all of the state averages to the projected state electorates, which have either been slightly redder or roughly the same. Usually, we basically upped the electorate for Republicans if Republicans have net gain in registrations in any of the states, and they actually have pretty much gained net registrations in all of these states, which it would make sense for the projected electorates to be slightly redder. And what we see here is obviously we're going to get to Arizona when we get to it in a second, because that one is going to be kind of interesting. But we're going to start off with Wisconsin. Wisconsin's around a 4.7% margin according to my aggregate. If we go to Wisconsin, we can see Trump is polling at 48.1%. This is actually probably a little bit lower than what he got in 2020. He actually got 48.8%. He's never gotten below 47.2% in the state, period. And so it doesn't make any sense when you have, pollsters that somehow in a 5-way race have them all the way down at about 44.8%. That just doesn't make any sense. And we're also accounting for the fact that third parties usually tend to get overestimated. That also has been applied when we do the weighing for all of the polling, and that's what you get. You get a lower third-party vote share than expected, and Kennedy nationally, we can actually go to the national aggregate. If we were to go to that, we'll actually see that Donald Trump right now is sitting at around 47.9%, which is about a point higher than what he got in 2020. Harris at around 43.8%, which is kind of similar to her job approval right now. And undecideds are about 3.5% of the electorate, and Kennedy's getting around 3.9% nationally, which would be a pretty big deal when he drops out tomorrow. We're going to see if he actually endorses President Trump, which it seems like that's going to be the case. If that happens, we're actually going to leave him in the aggregate because we're going to track his approval rating over time. And so looking at Wisconsin, right now, Kennedy is at about 3.8% there with about 3.6 undecided voters. And, Stein and West are practically all both polling below 1% right now. Harris all the way down at 43% in the averages. And just to go ahead and show you guys, right, we see here, Harris is ahead by 1.5% in the aggregate. The problem is Trump's vote share always gets underestimated. Looking at 2020, for example, you see here right now, they had a 60, basically a 6.7 percentage point lead for Joe Biden in, Wisconsin, and he only won by 0.7%. And it's because Trump's vote share was majorly underestimated in the state. And so what we're doing is we're essentially weighing all of the pollsters by the projected electorate that we have, which should be able to give a more accurate representation of what the electorate actually is going to be. And we also grade pollsters mathematically. You have, New York Times, Siena having an A rating, back in 2020 or whatever, but Rasmussen gets kicked off the 538 aggregate, even though nationally they tend to be a little bit more accurate. And ignore these ratings here because I actually haven't regraded all of the ratings, but out of all of the ratings here, Redfield and Wilton would actually have the highest grade out of any poll, and they would because they actually have polled the most out of any pollster for the past month or so. That's kind of the moving average that we have right now. And this is the first day of the average, so that's why you only see one dot. But Donald Trump is leading by about 4.7 percentage points in Wisconsin. If we look at the next state, that being Michigan, Trump's ahead by 2 points. He's polling at around 46.7%. In 2016, he got 47.5. In 2020, he got 47.8. So he's polling actually a little bit below what he got in both elections. But Harris, again, is at 44.7. And the projected electorate is around 30. It's around an R+3 electorate per se. That's kind of around where we have the electorate at. It was roughly tied in 2020. We could technically make it closer. Like if we had a tied electorate, you'd basically see Trump would actually still be up in the state regardless at 47.7%. But we believe this is the most accurate categorization of the electorate right now, putting Donald Trump ahead by 2 points. And again, Michigan polling the same thing right now. If you look at, right now, Harris is up in the five-way average by roughly 2.4%. And if you look at 2020, again, polling averages overestimated, Joe Biden. It's mainly because they underestimated Trump's support. If we look over here, Clinton, it's the same thing. They overestimated her by a pretty decent amount because they are not weighing the polls by the projected electorate. They probably haven't even been weighing for any projected electorate at all. And so that's the big problem. And pollsters tend to get gradings that really don't make a lot of sense in terms of accuracy or how often they poll or their sample sizes or whether or not they have likely voter screens. That's what we're doing here with this On Point Politics average. Pennsylvania, Trump is up here by 3.2%. He's polling around 48%. And last cycle, he got 48.8%. And in 2016, he got 48.6%. So he's polling pretty close to what he got in 2020, a little bit under, but he's still polling around there. And I guarantee you, if we plugged in all of the 2020 polling averages for those polls, if we were to plug in all of the averages, like let's say we're to plug in all the Joe Biden numbers, we would get pretty accurate polling results because Biden on net in some of these states was performing like 6 to 10 points better in some of the polls than Harris's. People were acting like Harris is doing so good. She's polling better than Biden was a month ago, but compared to 2020 Biden, she's not polling anywhere near as good. And then what's going on with some states, which a lot of the Sunbelt states are falling for this, their electorates and their polls are super Dem skewed and are not going to reflect the real electorate there. Just to add something, we did actually construct an average for the North Carolina governor's race. And I wanted to show this because, a lot of people are going to say, oh, you're just a right-wing pollster. You're just trying to have Trump up. Well, no, if you actually get all of the polls and you weigh by party in our projected electorate for North Carolina in 2024, and you plug in the same numbers for Stein and Robinson, you actually get Stein ahead by 5 points in the national average. Stein is at 45.2%, Robinson's at 42.2%. Now, the catch is that undecideds take up like 14.5% of the polling, which is quite a lot of people. I mean, that's a lot of people to have, undecided. So the race could technically still go either way, but Stein is clearly up in the average, which is shown in most polling, sites, but usually other polling sites will have them up 8, 9, 10 points, which is not the case. And they'll even have them polling close to 50% right now. And if you actually weigh the polls properly, he is only ahead by 5. And what's pretty interesting is that result is pretty similar to what the last governor candidate won by in 2020, Roy Cooper, by 4.5, and he ended up getting 51%. In 2016, Roy Cooper got 49%, and right now Stein is not polling anywhere near that, which is pretty interesting. That may show signs that there may be some problems there, and I'm curious to see if I were to do averages for the polling now, what would actually end up happening. That would be pretty interesting to look at. But now, looking at North Carolina's average, you'll see that the former president is winning there by 6 points. He's getting 48.7% to Harris's 42.7%. And when you look, Clinton got 46, Biden got 48, but Harris and Biden are not as popular as they were even a few years ago. Harris's favorables are still not as high as what they were beforehand. And Trump right now is polling at around a pretty decent vote share. He's actually polling a little bit below than what he's gotten. He's never gotten below 49.8% in the state, and he's actually polling a whole point and change below that. So to say that this is some super, right-wing skewed polling average on purpose doesn't really make sense, because in a lot of these states, we actually have Trump polling below his 2016 and 2020 numbers. And of course, undecideds take up a decent amount of the electorate. They always are. And that's why sometimes polling averages could be off, because undecideds can go a certain way. Now looking at Georgia, Trump is up by a really high amount. I mean, he's getting 49.6%, and he's never gone below in the state. He's never gone below 49%. He's never gone below 49.2, and he's polling higher than what he got in 2020. And Harris is all the way down at 43.7%. So that is fairly interesting. I mean, it's definitely possible that a lot of the undecideds could break for her, and Kennedy right now isn't polling that high in Georgia. He's actually only getting about 1.8% in the state right now, but those do put, all these states in the lean column, and that already puts Trump winning. Now, Arizona, this is the big one. This is the one where I was kind of like blown away by this. Trump is polling at 49.1%, which if you actually look at Arizona, that's actually roughly what he's been getting the past 8 years. I mean, in 2016, he got 48.7. In 2020, he got 49.1 exactly. So he's actually polling at his 2020 vote share right now. And Harris is all the way down at 41%, which seems very low. But the problem with Arizona and a lot of the new polls right now is the electorate in Arizona in 2020 was R+9. We now have it at R+10, considering that Republicans have cut the, voter registration. They basically doubled their voter registration lead in Arizona. So this is kind of our projected electorate right now. And looking at the polling, I mean, Harris is not polling very well in Arizona. I mean, on average, she's behind in most polls. It's a little bit of a mixed bag right now. But even looking at, for example, a pollster like, Redfield and Wilton, I mean, they had -3 for Biden. They had a +3 Biden margin. They were within margin of error. I mean, a lot of these polls were. But what's going on is that the projected electorates in some of these polls are very off, to the point where, like, even Trafalgar has the electorate off. New York Times Siena has the Democrats ahead in the electorate, even though the electorate last cycle was R+9. So it's not the electorate. The problem is that the polling electorates are not going to reflect the actual electorate when the election comes. And of course, undecideds can break a certain way, which there are a lot of them in Arizona, and Kennedy's getting a pretty high vote share here. So I'm curious to see what ends up happening once he basically drops out of the average. That's going to be really interesting to see. And again, we're going to leave him in the average, and as old polls kind of leave the aggregate, you'll be able to see what ends up happening there and where his support kind of goes. In the last state is Nevada, where Trump actually leads by 6.7 percentage points. He leads by 6.7 percentage points in Nevada. He's getting 48.6% there. And Republicans here have also netted in registration for Republicans as well. We're actually projecting an R+4 electorate in Nevada right now. It probably could be a little bit closer than that. Maybe it's R+2. But even in that case, Trump is basically still leading the average by 6 points. So it doesn't make that much of a difference. Maybe the electorates are +2 in Nevada. And we see that Trump here is still leading by 6 in the average. So it really doesn't make that much of a difference. And Trump is polling at a higher percentage vote share than he ever has. And Nevada is the only state where he actually net gained in the state at large. This is the only state where it actually moved to the right by like a tiny decimal point, but it still moved to the right. And the state of Nevada has been trending Republican. So I'm not surprised to see him polling it here. And Harris is polling very low in Nevada right now, too. And so that is it, guys. These are all of the polling averages right now in this, what I basically have cooked up here. These are polling averages that are supposed to eliminate the polling bias for the presidential election. That is the main goal of this, is to eliminate polls that essentially have an extreme bias, one way or another. Even if, like, for example, if Republicans were being oversampled in the polling data, which possibly under Biden they were, this model would have actually taken that into account. These polling averages, if Republicans were being overestimated in the, projected electorates for the polls, and we had an electorate that was smaller than that, I mean, they would be accounted for in the polling data. But right now, it seems like that's not going to be the case. It seems like he's going to end up roughly, give or take, do pretty well. It seems like he's going to do very, very well here. So, I mean, it is very interesting to look at all the numbers and the data and stuff like that. I mean, this is something I'm very passionate about, and I'm tired of the mainstream media, fiddling around with polls and saying, oh, look, Harris is actually up by this much. She's up by 4 in Arizona, which is basically impossible, because the poll where she's up by 4 in Arizona, Democrats are leading the electorate by 2, and Republicans led it by 9 last time. Like, there's a lot of problems with polling, and this is an experiment. I mean, I'm going to have these averages, and we're going to be tracking them and using these over time, and if I get the election wrong, that means that my averages were just wrong, period, and I go ahead and I adjust what I need to adjust for next cycle. But I feel like these are going to be more accurate than most of the pollsters out there, and we may be more spot on in these polling averages. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. I just kind of wanted to go ahead and show what these new averages showed for 2024. You're not going to see any other, political YouTuber do this, create their own polling averages. No one else is doing this on YouTube right now. So make sure to go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you want more content just like this, and I will see you guys in the next video.